Welcome to the Football Breakdown. It's Friday the 16th of December, and this is the Fantasy EFL Gameweek 18 preview. I'm Ian Cooper, and there's no Matthew South. Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be a solo pod today, as Matthew is away on holiday, so the pressure really just rests on my shoulders alone. So, first of all, if you feel like I've missed any picks on this episode, or want to have a debate on who I have put forward, then you can contact us on X at FBBDPod or on Bluesky at the Football Breakdown. It's a double game week in the Championship, so I will be focusing solely on the Championship, as I feel that's what every team is going to consist of this week. So I'm changing the format to select one player from every Championship game in the first round of fixtures. But first, let's go back to game week 17, and I'll talk about how I did. I only got 65 points. It was a pretty poor week for me. I captained Cole Johnson, who got a clean sheet in the first game, so we managed to get 22 points for him, as well as David Harrington, who got a clean sheet in the first game, but sadly that second game against Doncaster, it was a bit of a risk. I wasn't too sure if they could get the clean sheet there, but they ended up conceding 4 goals, so they actually get a -2 points for 4 goals conceded, which does hurt slightly. Into the midfield, I did have Jason Knight, who got his assist, so I was pretty happy with that. However, sadly, Osama Ashley, Quayne Poku, and Sam Smith all blanked, which was a bit of a surprise to me. But it's always the risk with this, isn't it? Moving on to Matt's team, we had pretty similar defense. Well, we had the same defense, actually, but he had Mackenzie Hunt, who also managed to get 22 points on a captain. Joel Pereira managed to get the clean sheet against Cambridge, and Scott Twine scored against Plymouth Argyle, as well as, luckily, he had a Fleetwood player in attack, who was Ronan Coughlin, who did score. Sorry, he didn't score. He got 2 assists in the Doncaster game, so he managed to get a nice 11-point return there after blanking in the first game, as well as obviously Borja Signs, who scored yet again. And I wonder if he's going to include him again this week. I certainly debated it, but I'll let you know further along in the podcast. Now, look, I could have a debate on where I went wrong this week. I could talk about where I feel like players should have done better, the results that went against me. But it's a bit strange talking just to myself and having no one to bounce off of. So I'm just going to roll straight into the games this week. And of course, as mentioned, it's a Championship double game week. So we're going to be focusing on the Championship here, as I'm sure many of you will as well. So the first game I'm going to look at is Burnley versus Middlesbrough. Now, there's no surprise here. I've selected a goalkeeper from Burnley. I wanted to get my goalkeeper pick selected early, and realistically, where better to side than a side who has kept 5 clean sheets in a row. Trafford is heavily backed at over 11%, so he needs no real introduction. Burnley have conceded just 0.3 goals a game, and with the 2 games this week being played at Turf Moor, it just gives them that edge over picking Michael Cooper for Sheffield United, I feel. Burnley's 2 games against Middlesbrough and Derby, and that's where the controversy comes in the selection, really. Middlesbrough have scored 3 or more goals in 5 of their last 7 games, but strangely, the 2 games that they've lost in that time, they were unable to score. So I do feel like there is still a chance here. Also, this Burnley are just a completely different team. The 2 teams that Middlesbrough have travelled away from, who are in the top 6, were Watford and Sunderland, both resulting in losses. And I just feel more confident picking a player to keep a clean sheet for Burnley than I do picking a Middlesbrough player to score at the minute. Well, I say at the minute. They're obviously flying, but against this Burnley side, I just feel more confident in the clean sheet here. Now, Derby is the game on Tuesday. Derby have a really interesting run of fixtures. Since the 19th of October, Derby have only played one team from the top half of the table, being Sheffield Wednesday, sat in 12th place. So this week is such a step up for them, where they have to face not just Burnley away, but also Leeds, which really could kill confidence there. Derby have played 3 of the top 6 this season away from home and have lost all 3 of them and blanked in 2. So I'm hoping for a double clean sheet here, really. And I feel like there's quite a good cause for it. Now, talking about Derby, let's move on to the Leeds versus Derby game. Ebu Adams has been in great form lately, but a lot of his points this season have come up from stepping up the pitch to make interceptions and driving with the ball. And I just don't see this being much of an occurrence in this game, as I'm expecting Derby to be sat back and trying to soak up a lot of pressure instead. So let's look at a Leeds player. And I want to step away from Leeds defenders. I don't think they're quite so defensively resolute. And I'm expecting they won't keep Middlesbrough quiet in the second game. So naturally, I'd want to be looking at an attacking player. But this does come with some risks, as Daniel Farke consistently subs both wingers and striker in nearly every game. And with a double game week, he's going to be happy to rotate his players here as well. So I need to find someone who's just as effective coming off the bench as well. So I'm going to take a punt on Dan James. Now, in the last double game week, Dan started the first game against Swansea and claimed 3 assists, nearly playing the full 90 minutes, and then came off the bench against Luton with 21 minutes to go and scored in that game. So it bodes quite well for his recent form and have an impact starting and coming into the game as well. So I feel like I've just covered this angle here, as they do like to tinker, but I needed a player that was just consistent on both ends. Next game up is Sheffield Wednesday versus Preston. It's 2 pretty inconsistent teams with a whole lot of inconsistent players to choose from. But I found a player who on the whole is having a really good season, and that's Deshaun Bernard. He's back in the squad this week after serving a 1-match suspension for 5 yellow cards last week. He's played 16 of Wednesday's 18 league games and has managed 6 clean sheets in that time. He's also a key figure in the backline and is extremely busy, recording 61 clearances, which is perfect for the bonus points here. Bernard has also scored in Game Week 16 against Cardiff, which is also something I try and search for when I'm looking for a defender. It's another avenue to try and get some bonus points. And another key reason for the selection is Wednesday having 2 home games, with the other against Blackburn Rovers, who they're going to be dangerous, but I feel it's quite well matched. And whilst Bernard might not get the clean sheet here, as Blackburn do average just over 1 goal a game, I expect Bernard to be at least really busy with lots of blocks and clearances here. Moving on to the Sunderland-Stoke game. Now, with Dennis Serkin out of the squad last week due to surgery on his wrist, so he missed the game, but he is due back this week. I'm just slightly worried there's a chance he won't play both games. And despite Sunderland's recent dip in form with no wins in 6, they're still really defensively solid. And 4 of those games were away from home, so having the 2 games here will balance it up, and I think it's going to be a big plus. So with Serkin being a slight doubt, I'm going to pick a player who has shifted over to the left back to replace him. And even if Serkin does come back in, Trey Hume is the player I'm going to pick. He will revert back to right back in this side. Trey is a fairly low selection, being only 0.7% of people's teams, but I feel somehow he is going under the radar within the Sunderland side. He's managed 10 clean sheets in 17 games and averages 2 tackles and clearances per match. So, a really assured selection here. He's only recorded 1 assist this season, but has an expected assist of 3.1, which puts him at one of the highest chance creators from right back in the Championship. And I feel like Regis Labrie is going to find a way to find Sunderland scoring more often as well, especially when their goals have dried up. So I feel like Hume could only profit from this as well. Now, looking at the first game that they played, Stoke played an equally dominant Burnley side and only created 1 big chance. And I feel like this is just going to be the same sort of case here. And the second game against Bristol City at home, which I mentioned earlier, Bristol also blanked in 2 of their last 3 games, despite scoring 4 goals against Plymouth. But I wouldn't see that result being too relevant here, especially with Plymouth's away form being famously woeful. Next game up for the pod is Cardiff versus Watford. Now, initially, I was looking at a Watford player to include here, especially when they have a game coming up against Hull, who've been struggling for goals. But there's only one player that should immediately catch your eyes, especially when looking at Game Week 17's point total, and that's Alec Robertson. He managed to get 17 points last week, and he's currently at 0% selection at the time of recording. So maybe I should have saved him for my sub 0.1 pick. But I don't really have anyone else that I would want to talk about in this game that I feel so strongly about. Robertson had quite a slow start to the season until the 19th of October, where Cardiff won 5-0 against Plymouth. And look, we're starting to see a bit of a pattern here. So since that game, Alex has scored some high points, including 15 points against Plymouth, 12 points against West Brom, 8 against Blackburn, and of course 17 last week. Now, all these totals are accumulated by different aspects of his game. Against West Brom, they all came from interceptions. where against Coventry he created key passes, which resulted in an assist and scored a goal as well. Omar Ritza has just been appointed finally as the first team manager until the end of the season. And a theme of the pod so far, they have 2 home games coming up, with the second team being Preston. And you feel like there's going to be some feel-good factor within the stadium with the fans taking to the new manager, despite some unrest, going up higher up the club. But at least they're pretty happy with the appointment of Omar Ritza. For the next game, it's Hull versus Blackburn. And we have a managerless Hull side who have parted way with Tim Walters and are not expected to appoint a new manager before this game. As it's fair to say, a fairly rejuvenated Blackburn Rovers team who have just got back-to-back 1-0 wins against Middlesbrough and Leeds, restricting both teams just one big chance. And that's what really caught my attention and why I'm putting forward Dominic Hyam. Hyam has 7 clean sheets in 17 games as a staggering 90 clearances this season. Another thing that stands out on the EFL Fantasy site is Hyam is right up there in the points total, alongside defenders from the top 6 clubs, which really shouldn't be slept on. And on the Hull side of things, they've only averaged 0.9 goals a game. And with Liam Miller and Mohamed Belloumi still out with injury, I think they might not have enough creativity to trouble this strong Blackburn side. So I just feel like we're going to see a clean sheet here as well. It's a big game. Obviously, Hull could quite easily go score here, but just on the basis of what I've got in front of me, looking at the data, I'm pretty confident on the Hyam pick. Next up, I want to talk about a forward for the first time on the show. So this is the game of Luton versus Swansea. And on the whole, Luton's attack is very streaky. They're currently on the wrong side of that streak. I feel some of this can be put down to Alfie Dougherty's injury hampering chances being created for the strikers. So I'm going to focus on a Swansea player. And I'm going to be looking at the winger Ronald. Ronald started to show some form lately, contributing 4 goal involvements in his last 6 games. He's currently playing as a left winger, but does count as a forward on EFL Fantasy. Ronald might only have 1 goal this season, but with an XG of 2, and he's managed 15 shots inside the box, so he's certainly getting into positions to add to this tally. Now, Luton have conceded the 3rd most goals this season and struggle at containing direct forwards, exploiting quite a weak defensive unit. Dan James and Borja Sainz fall into this category and have both scored in Luton's last 2 games. Plymouth is the other opponent, and I'm expecting Matti Sorinola to be playing right back here, who's been caught high up the pitch when Argyle lose possession, which just leaves a massive gap for Ronald to exploit, and is a real opportunity to be a star man in this second game as well. So that's who I'm putting forward here. He's only selected at 0.2%, so slightly under the radar here, but not quite enough to be put as my sub 0.1 pick, so I'm just going to put him forward for this selection instead. Next game up is Millwall versus Coventry. Now, this game's quite tricky actually, because the second match Millwall play as Sheffield United and Coventry's as West Brom. So obviously you would say this is less than ideal, but I would normally side with a Millwall side here, and that's what I'm going to do. We've discussed their goalkeeper Jensen, as well as midfielders like Denort and Saville. Let's be honest, Millwall haven't scored more than 1 goal since the 31st of August. So I'm going to have to look at a defender here. So this time it's Yaphet Tanganga's turn to see the spotlight. Tanganga has actually scored twice in his last 4 games, hence how his average rating is 6.9 this season. But with Millwall's brilliantly defensive record, he's only conceded 8 goals in 15 appearances. Now, his first game against Coventry, they don't struggle for goals, but we've seen Millwall do this countless amount of times this season, and how can I gamble on this not being the case here? And look, Sheffield United are going to be a really tough game, but I can still aim for bonus points here for the second game, as I'm really just focusing on this first game as a whole. Now, let's move on to Plymouth versus Oxford. This is going to be a tough game to call. Plymouth have been really poor lately, but their home form does stand out as being quite good, whilst Oxford have the joint worst away record in the league. But they do have one player that I've been waiting to come back for injury and gain some match sharpness, and that's Cameron Brannigan. He's only played 7 league games so far, but has averaged 5.9 points and is a proper box-to-box player who takes a really high volume of shots. Cameron has managed to score double figures in his last 3 seasons and recorded 11 assists last season too, so he's also creative as well as taking these top shots. He averages an interception per game as well, and against a Plymouth side who will try and play on the front foot as they are at home, there's a real advantage of Brannigan just being a real dominant figure here, regaining the ball and have plenty of chances to take shots at goal from distance, which he has a real knack of pulling off. Next up, we have Portsmouth versus Bristol City. And last week, Matt mentioned he was going to wait and see if Scott Twine was back in the starting 11 instead of Mehmeti. But to our surprise, they both featured in the game. And Mehmeti was playing as an inverted winger. Now, Mehmeti is a low selected player at 0.1%, but averages 5.3 points a game. So it's a really solid under-the-radar pick. I watched the game against Plymouth last week, and Mehmeti is an excellent ball carrier who cuts in and shoots comfortably from the edge of the area. Reminds you of a certain Borja Sign, should I say. And his goal-scoring record has been very good this season, sitting on 6 goals currently, and averages a crazy 3.7 shots a game. They play Portsmouth and Sunderland, but it's the first game where I'm really interested here, as we've already said before, Sunderland are very resolute, especially at home. Now, in the penultimate game here, we have QPR versus Norwich. And keeping on the pattern of selecting fun attacking midfielders, for the QPR Norwich game, I'm going to put Emiliano Marcondes forward. He has 2 goals and 2 assists this season in 10 games, joining the Norwich side a little later in the season. But all these goal involvements have come in the last 3 games. He's really added flair and attack and threat to a Norwich side, who are already prolific in front of goal. They play QPR, who have the worst home form in the league, conceding 16 goals at Loftus Road, which certainly bodes well for this pick. And in the second game, they have Portsmouth at home, who are obviously bottom of the league, but also second bottom in home form as well. And finally, we come to West Brom versus Sheffield United. Immediately, there's red flags on this game. If you were to look at the league table from home games, West Brom are 21st with the 4th worst record, only winning once. And Sheffield United on the away form are 3rd. So you would suggest I'd be leaning towards a Sheffield United player, right? But I tell you what, back in Sheffield United against West Brom and Millwall away from home just doesn't seem to sit right with me. In this first game, Sheffield are obviously going to play against a top 6 side, and in their previous games away from home against similar opposition, they've lost to Middlesbrough and Leeds, both away too. So I'm going to go for a West Brom player here. And I've also talked a lot about defenders and a lot of midfielders on this pod, so let's discuss one more forward, and I'll take on Karlan Grant. Not the obvious choice, but he has been in the side consistently this season for Corberan and has a goal contribution in 4 of his last 6 games. Whilst not having more goals than Josh Madger this season, I feel he's involved in the game a lot more and has clocked 17 key passes this season and a rather high expected assist creator for a forward in the Championship. And obviously, the next game is Coventry, who are fairly unknown under Lampard, but I don't think they will be defensively sound, especially at the Hawthorns, where West Brom have a very clear aim of turning their dominance into goals. Now, on to the next section of the pod. Obviously, Matthew isn't here, but he has sent me his team for this week, and he's also sent me his sub 0.1 pick. So we'll get onto that now. And I've literally just opened it up now, so it's a bit of a surprise to me, but it's no surprise who he's picked. He has gone for Alex Robertson, who I mentioned earlier in the pod. I'm just going to talk about what he's mentioned here. Matt's gone and said, which I said earlier, Robertson's back off a 17-point week. Almost 2 chances created per 90, which is the top 10% in the league, and 1.6 interceptions per 92. So look, as I mentioned earlier, I should have saved... I could have saved him for the sub 0.1 pick, but Matthew has gone for him. And as for my sub 0.1 pick, I'm going back to the MKM Stadium, where I'm selecting a Blackburn player. See, I was never against Blackburn. I just needed to be convinced, and I'm picking a player that Blackburn fans have been very excited about, and has started every game since mid-October, and that's Todd Cantwell. Todd has a goal and assist in his last 2 games, and whilst only scoring once this season, has an XG of 2.38. Todd is a real pedigree player in this Blackburn side whose chance creation alongside a scoring knack feels really good pick to get at 0%. And as mentioned earlier, They are playing QPR and Portsmouth. It gives me real confidence thinking that Cantwell's name's going to be... We're going to be talking about him a lot more in the future, I feel. And against these two sides, I think we're going to see his class really show here. So just to round off the pod before going into our team picks, I'll just run you through the team that Matthew's gone with for this week. He's gone for Ilya Meslier in goal. He's gone for a defensive three of Jayden Bogle, CJ Egan-Riley and Torbjorn Hegem. Two midfielders in Jason Knight and Alex Robertson. And up front, he's gone for Borja Sainz. And you know what? I've been wanting to say this for a while. Matt just consistently picks players that I've talked about in previous pods. Just looking there, I talked about Jayden Bogle, I've talked about Egan-Riley. I love Egan-Riley. Talked about Hegem. I suggested Knight last week, I've suggested Robertson this week, and I've previously spoken about Borja Sainz. So I just feel like I've got the upper hand here. He knows that I've been gaining on him. I lost a little bit of ground last week, but on the whole, I've been catching up. The only way he can combat that is by stealing my picks. But look, fair play. That's all I can say. Moving on to my team, I've also gone for three in defence with two midfielders. So I've gone for James Trafford in goal, Dominic Hyam, Trey Hume, and Japhet Tanganga. Midfield two of Todd Cantwell and Emiliano Marcondes. And I've gone for Ronald up front. Look, you might say, why have you gone for Ronald instead of Borja Sainz? I just feel like the fixtures and the points I mentioned earlier just make him a favourable pick for me. I haven't selected a captain yet, but when I post my team on the socials, which you can find us, as mentioned earlier, I'll reveal who I'm going to captain there. I just haven't quite made my mind up yet. And rounding off the pod, we're going to go for our team picks. Now, this is where we put a £5 bet on the two teams we play, and the bet goes towards the first game of this game week. Now, this section of the podcast is for 18s plus only. Obviously, be gamble aware. We're just having fun here alongside trying to get some points. Look, I've taken a bit of a hit lately. I won my first bet for the first game week that we did on the pod, and I've lost every one since. And to be fair, I've not even really come close. So I'm going to go for Norwich, who are playing against QPR away, and I'm going for Blackburn Rovers, who have Hull away. So both away, trying to get some away points. Funny enough, actually, in their second games, it's Portsmouth away and Sheffield Wednesday away. So I've got 4 away games here, trying to get the wins and the bonus points for away from home. And my £5 bet returns me a whopping £32.39. So it would really take me in the lead here if I managed to see 2 wins for this game. And as for Matthew, he has also selected Norwich, but he's gone for Sheffield Wednesday. And his £5 would return him £22.45. So still quite a gamble here, but a bit more conservative than for what I've gone for. And that rounds us off for Game Week 18. There was no weekly breakdown show this week, unfortunately, but that's because me and Matt have started a project which will be revealed to you in the coming weeks, and we're really excited about it. Again, join us next Thursday for our Fantasy EFL Game Week 19 preview, where I'll be joined back with Matthew, and I'm sure it won't feel like I'm just rattling off stats to you. Thank you very much for listening, and please do feel free to send us your team selections on Twitter at FBBDPod and Bluesky at Football Breakdown. And I will give some feedback and opinions of what I feel like are some interesting choices. And remember, take it easy.